Hello there, YouTube. It's your boy B3 back with another kicking graphic novel review. If you've been following my reviews, you know that we're doing Weird DC right now. We're focusing on DC Comics books that are weird and unique. So a lot of Young Animal, a lot of Grant Morrison, and also a lot of Swamp Thing. That is why today we are looking at the book Swamp Thing New Roots, Volume 1. Yeah, I was going to do Flex Mentallo, Man of Muscle Mystery, but my Young Animal Doom Patrol books were kind of bigger videos for graphic novel reviews, and I wanted to do something maybe a bit shorter, take a little break from the meta commentary, bigger, crazier stuff. And Swamp Thing is one of DC's weirdest characters, with some of its weirdest lore. And Swamp Thing just has unique books for DC. And so I wanted to do this one. This is one of the maybe less weird Swamp Thing books, but it's still pretty cool. So, Swamp Thing New Roots, Volume 1. Let me read you the back of the book. The Seeds of Destruction. Deep in the Louisiana bayou, a terrifying monster stalks the waters, strangling life before it can grow, and leaving a trail of death in its wake. And the Sunderland Corporation is coming for Swamp Thing next. Swamp Thing alone stands to defend his community from the growing menace of an evil corporation, ready to turn the earth to barren soil if it helps their bottom line. But Sunderland's reach stretches further than even the Swamp Thing can grasp. Their plans for destruction will affect not just the swamps he calls home, but the entire planet. And Swamp Thing is not the only strange spirit alive in the bayou. When a fee-follet, a ghost light, a will-o'-the-wisp leads him to strangers who need his help, Swamp Thing must discover what this restless ghost's true purpose might be, if he can survive long enough to find out. Collecting Swamp Thing Giant number 1 through 5, and additional stories published digitally as Swamp Thing New Roots 7 through 9. This volume features strange and terrifying tales from Mark Russell, who worked on Exit Stage Left, The Snagglepuss Chronicles, Mark Santucci, who did Aquaman and Green Lantern, and Phil Hester, who worked on Green Arrow and Wonder Woman, as well as Tom Mandrake, who worked on The Spectre and Martian Manhunter, which I think is pretty good. Because if you combine those characters, that's almost Swamp Thing right there. But also, dude's last name is Mandrake. He worked on Swamp Thing, and his last name is Mandrake. Come on, tell me that's not perfect. Come on, that's awesome. So anyway, Swamp Thing New Roots, Volume 1. Oh, also Hi-Fi and John Klotz has worked on this. It's a lot of different Swamp Thing stuff just all compiled together. Stuff that wasn't from like ongoing runs and stuff. But the Sunderland Corporation is making this new wheat for farmers. They're GMOing the shit out of it. And this wheat is infertile, which means farmers can't breed it. They have to continually buy it from Sunderland. But these plants also infect all the plants around them with this infertility. So, eventually, this strand of wheat will make all plant life on the planet infertile and kill all life on Earth. The Sunderland Company knows this, and they don't care. They know that it's going to kill every living thing on the planet, making it completely barren, no life, unable to recover. And they just don't give a shit. They're all like, oh, we'll be dead by the time that happens. Yeah, everyone will be dead by the time that happens. That's kind of the point. So Swamp Thing is attacking their facilities. He's not killing anybody, but he's destroying anything that has this crop in it. He's also been kind of living sort of peacefully alongside this village in the bayou. Everyone there seems to like him. And there's this kind of shaman lady there who also likes him. And Swamp Thing, he's just been feeling so negative, all this negativity and hate inside him, and he's found a good way to release it. A lot of people might do that through art or maybe exercise. Swamp Thing releases this hatred by putting all his toxic emotions into a fruit inside his chest and then expelling it and throwing it into the bayou. Yeah. Anyways, the Sutherland Corporation decides they want to capture Swamp Thing so that they can use his DNA to make slaves. Slaves. And they even call them that. They know that's what they are. They want to make slaves that can grow food on themselves and harvest it. Self-harvesting crops. Slaves. These are sentient beings. They want to make more Swamp Things to be slaves. It's insane. And it's so believable, too. Like, you read this and you believe that they would kill all life on the planet. You believe that they would have slaves if they could get away with it. And you believe that they would in real life. Anyways, this shaman betrays Swamp Thing. She's going to lock him in this airtight container after she uses a plant tranquilizer on him. And it turns out the tranquilizer is made from the toxic fruits that he's been releasing into the bayou. And the shaman saw these fruits, and she thinks it's his heart. She thinks she'll become immortal if she eats from it. But in actuality, since he's putting all his hatred and toxic emotions into this fruit, the fruit itself is extremely toxic. It poisons her. She dies. But Swamp Thing wakes up from this little coma. He sees the dead friend in the airtight container, and he thinks she gave her life saving him, but she actually betrayed him. But here's the thing. Here's the crazy thing. The fruit didn't kill her. Just put her in a coma indistinguishable from death. She was buried alive, and nobody knew. What a horrifying fate. Oh my god. Absolutely fucking horrifying. But also Swamp Thing also seems to be on good terms with this family. There's like an old man that fishes, and his two grandchildren, who are brother and sister, of course, are all just on good terms with Swamp Thing. They're just like friends. They have Swamp Thing over for dinner. And I actually really like this. I like, because Swamp Thing, he's been around for decades. So I think the idea of Swamp Thing making friends with like these people that live in the bayou and them kind of accepting him, like these people that kind of know how to live with the environment, it's interesting, and I haven't really seen it much before. I've read a lot of Swamp Thing, and I like how it's like really front and center here. It's really well done. It makes you feel like he's part of a community, but every time it shows you these people he's close with, they die. His friend just betrayed him in the last issue, and in this one, the old man just has a heart attack while fishing. It's nothing sinister. He just has a heart attack while fishing. But his grandchildren, one of them becomes a problem. It turns out one of them works for Sunderland and is trying to help them capture Swamp Thing. So Swamp Thing is betrayed yet again by another friend. And he's so tempted to kill people. So I believe this Swamp Thing is Alec Holland. And remember, we're going to talk about Alan Moore's Swamp Thing here soon. But in the first volume of that, it is revealed that Swamp Thing isn't Alec Holland. It just thinks it's Alec Holland. It has a copy of his consciousness in him. And it's not really him. But then in Brightest Day, Alec Holland was brought back to life, and he was also reinfused back into the Swamp Thing. So then Alec Holland became the Swamp Thing and just got the memories of the Swamp Thing that thought it was Alec Holland, just like it got Alec Holland's memories itself. And I think this Swamp Thing is Alec Holland actually being Swamp Thing, which is why he's not killing, because Swamp Thing is killed before, but since Alec Holland fused with Swamp Thing, he hasn't been a killer anymore. Since the real Alec Holland became the real Swamp Thing. So Swamp Thing kind of stops hiding, which creates a lot of tourism, but also kind of increases the pressure on him. He starts this public war with Sunderland. And then the CEO of Sunderland is like using political bribes to make the government go after Swamp Thing. Also, a cult forms around Swamp Thing. And the cult is like, Swamp Thing, you gotta fucking kill all these people. Swamp Thing, you gotta murder just a ton of dudes. And then you can rule the world. And there can be ecological balance. Swamp Thing's like, I don't want to fucking do that. I don't have the right to do that. Doing that itself would affect the balance. Especially if you read New 52 Swamp Thing with the cedar. Remember, he was trying to make a balance, but didn't work. So, Sunderland's political donations only get him so far, because Swamp Thing is kicking the government's fucking ass. And then they run simulations, and what it would take for them to destroy Swamp Thing just wasn't worth it at the current time. And I'm not going to lie, I wasn't sure where this was in continuity for a while, because Swamp Thing is doing a lot of big public stuff, but we're not seeing any other DC characters outside of Swamp Thing's own lore. So I was like, maybe this story is just Swamp Thing. Because, like, the way that people talk about Swamp Thing in this book kind of implies that there aren't a lot of superheroic beings, but then we get a shot at the end of an issue after the government says they aren't going to pursue Swamp Thing, and we see them put up the contingency plan for Swamp Thing, and they have contingency plans for Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Cyborg, Aquaman, etc., etc. So I guess this is just normal DC canon. I really don't know. I really, truly don't know. Anyway, Swamp Thing's cult, he keeps trying to get them to just fucking stop. He's like, you guys gotta leave me alone. You guys gotta disband. I'm not a god. You've killed people. I don't like that. I should kill you for what you've done, but I'm not gonna, because I'm not like you. I'm Swamp fucking Thing. But then they inform Swamp Thing, because some of them actually work at Sutherland. That's kind of like double agents. They're like, hey, they cloned you, actually. You have a son and a daughter. And they're slaves. And Swamp Thing's like, huh? So he grows the kaiju size, which is something Swamp Thing does every now and then. He creates a lot of trouble. He does a lot of damage. And then he realizes that he just needs to speak directly to people. But Sunderland, and this is crazy, they have a press conference where they reveal the slaves to the public and to potential investors. They're like, hey, these are our plant slaves, and they're gonna revolutionize the industry. And everyone knows they're slaves. They're using the word slaves. There's one panel where an investor asks a question, and he says, quote, is this safe? I mean, are there any side effects or consequences to this, slave food, end quote. He doesn't ask a question about whether it's ethical or moral or anything. He asks if there's side effects to eating the food. Everyone in this room is 100% down with slaves. And it's shocking, but once again, not surprising. I could see this happening in the real world. Anyway, Swamp Thing shows up. He materializes out of a potted plant. And he gives a big old speech where he's like, y'all gotta fuck off. All right? You guys stop doing this. I'll stop fucking around too. His son dies, gives his life to save him. But he is able to save his daughter. And Swamp Thing angers his cult. He refuses to destroy the world and rule. So what they want to do is manipulate Sunderland into destroying the world himself so that nature can reclaim it. So they're like, oh, Mr. Sunderland, you know, if the president and others aren't taking your political bribes to, you know, settle the score of Swamp Thing, why don't you just buy your way into being president? Which, of course, works, because it's always worked. We've seen it work, right? We've all seen it. So Sunderland becomes president, specifically so that he can get nuke access and nuke Swamp Thing. Like, almost his first act as president is to just try to nuke Swamp Thing. But also, all the innocent people living with Swamp Thing. You see, Alec Holland has created these forest cities that are completely free to live in. Free apartments, free food, free water. They're free. And they're all environmentally conscious. He has created these cities for humanity. All he has to do is choose to live in them. That's all he has to do. That's it. He can even create trees that grow clothing on the branches. Really? It's insane. So anyway, President Sunderland, he's an old man. He can't figure out how to use the football. So, Swamp Thing's cult is like, oh, just give us your access codes. We'll do it for you. And the fucking idiot gives them the codes. They take him down to a bunker. And they launch nukes at Swamp Thing, because they're like, he betrayed us because he wouldn't commit genocide. So we're going to launch nukes at his city with all the people in it. But they also decide to launch nukes all over the world. And it takes everything Swamp Thing has to stop it. So the cult launches these nukes, and then they stay in a bunker for 20 years. And when they come out in their suits, they notice the world is about exactly the same. It's incredible. They come out after 20 years. Swamp Thing's cities are doing well. And he's alive. And he's like, I stopped the fucking missiles. I knew you were in that bunker. Because, you know, I could sense you wherever you are off the green. And I just let you think that the world was destroyed. But also this 20-year time jump kind of does make me feel like this isn't in main DC continuity. I'm kind of confused about where this is continuity-wise. To be honest, I don't think it really super matters. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed that story. I prefer the horror stories for Swamp Thing, but that story was interesting because it didn't really feel like a horror story, but it also really wasn't a superhero story either. Like Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing is very superhero-y. The New 52 Swamp Thing books were superhero-y for sure, despite the fact that they're usually a monster book. But this one didn't feel like a superhero book or a horror book. Monster book for sure, but it was unique. It had a unique feel for Swamp Thing, and I liked that. And these next stories all have this like ghost light. It's like a ghostly skull. The Fifolet, or I think that's how you pronounce it, because I think it's like a French word, Fifolet, so the T is silent. And these stories they feel old. They're not old, but they feel old. Like the way the dialogue is written, and there are these narration boxes. It just feels like an old story. But once again, it isn't. There's like this circus that is made up of a bunch of ugly, immortal, undead performers that suck the life out of people that see their performances. And the Fifole leads Swamp Thing to them so he'll stop them. And they lead Swamp Thing to this immortal guy who's raising up a slave ship. And he was a slave like hundreds of years ago. It seems kind of touchy the way it's done, to be honest. And the art on this one is not my favorite. The art is a lot uglier, but not in a way that's beneficial. Because, a lot of Swamp Thing characters are ugly. But I mean, like, this immortal man, you keep seeing him, and his face is, like, different looking on every panel. He's just not drawn well. His character model isn't super consistent. And then there are, like, some panels where people's eyes aren't the right size. Like, someone has one eye bigger than the other eye. The art feels kind of rushed on this one. I don't like it. It's almost like rushed 90s art, but also kind of a 90s or even older writing style as well. But I thought this was a digital first comic, which means it's definitely not old. So, like, what's going on here? Because, like, the very next story with the Fifole has a ton of narration boxes, which, once again, have really fallen out of favor in comic book writing. It's antiquated, really. But it turns out there's this girl, but I think she's not a girl. I think she's supposed to be a grown woman whose brain is kind of that of a child. But the way she's drawn, she does just look like a child. So, and her being a grown woman who behaves like a child doesn't serve the narrative, but Swamp Thing says that's the case. Why couldn't she just be a child? Also, more ugly art with inconsistent character designs. Because, like, the page that reveals her to us, she looks more like Dopey from Disney's Snow White. She's got, like, the big kind of ears poking out. And then the very next panel, her ears are, like, covered by her hair, and her eyes are rounder, and her face is rounder. Like, what's going on here? And then the next page, her face does look more adult on that page. So they can't keep the faces straight on these. I don't like it. Like, if Swamp Thing looks different panel to panel, I just kind of assume that his form is shifting, But also, Swamp Thing does look inconsistent panel to panel. But what I'm saying is I can forgive it for Swamp Thing himself. But for these other characters, you can't forgive it. Also, like, it seems like she has an abusive father, but Swamp Thing really doesn't see him abuse her. He kind of just... I thought there was going to be a twist where the father wasn't abusive and the girl was manipulating Swamp Thing or something. No, it was just a really straightforward story with ugly art. There's nothing wrong with a straightforward story, but I just expected a little more, I guess. But then Swamp Thing follows the Fifole back to the lab where he died and became the Swamp Thing Turns out the Thief Fillet is the cursed soul of one of the men that orchestrated Alec Holland's death. He was actually killed by his co-conspirators because he was like, look, I'm an arsonist, I'm a thief, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a murderer. I don't want to murder Alec Holland. So the guys were like, all right then, we'll just kill you then, so you can't stop us from killing Alec Holland. They threw him in the swamp, and his soul is trapped there. Swamp Thing makes the Thief Fillet a plant body, and, you know, it kind of tells him his story. And the Thief Fillet isn't being forced to lead Swamp Thing to people to help them. He's actually doing it to its own. Like, this is a conscious choice he's made, which I think is nice. And when Alec Holland tells him that he would forgive him, his soul is released. The Swamp Thing's exact words are, quote, "It is not my place to forgive you, but if it were, I would," end quote. And when he says those words, the soul is freed and given peace. I thought that was a nice little book. I thought that was a good little end to the Thief Fillet saga. And the next issue, I thought there were a bunch of unmen, but there's like these mutant things, and it's actually really weird, because what happens in this book is normally the kind of thing I applaud. Just weird, out there, crazy sci-fi stuff. Like, it's cosmic in a way. Swamp Thing touching the cosmic. This is normally the type of story I would applaud, with this cosmic ancient alien that lives in a well, really Lovecraftian in a way, creating monsters out of human beings to fight even worse monsters that are coming from the stars, from another world, from another dimension, so that they can fight these monsters. But to Swamp Thing, it looks like this being is just turning humans into mindless beasts. But this doesn't work as a single issue story. There's so much to it. This should have been an arc. This should have been a whole Swamp Thing arc. And the people are just returned back to their human forms after the evil aliens are defeated. There's just so much going on here that it just one little issue to tell this story. And it's not even actually a full issue. It's like a really short. It's crazy short. It was just too short for this big story. Way too fast-paced. You can't absorb any of it. By the time it ends, you're just like, what? And I think they could have done so much more if the people just stayed monsters, like released from the aliens' control, but oh, their bodies have been changed now. What do they do? Maybe they need a leader that can protect them. Maybe Swamp Thing. And maybe that could lead into another story arc with Swamp Thing trying to, like, govern this new society in the bayou of mutants. You could have done so much with this. This story could have been so much, and it could have led into so much. But it's 8 pages. It's an 8-page story. I have no issue with little side stories, but that shouldn't have been one. Another little side story is about Swamp Thing hunting down this guy that killed just this innocent old woman who lived in the swamp. She'd had a rough life. She got a little house there. Swamp Thing would, like, bring her flowers sometimes. And this guy just killed her because her abusive ex-husband told him lies about her. And this story actually came across as very Tales of the Crypt-y. You know, like the Crypt Keeper should have been framing this. It really felt like Tales of the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt? Tales of the Crypt? Tales from the Crypt? I can't remember which one of those is actually correct. It really felt like one of those comics. Really, truly it did, with like the kind of comeuppance and the moral and even the art in a way. But that kind of ends it. So what do I think of Swamp Thing New Roots Volume 1? It's kind of a big book with many different stories in it. And I think it starts out pretty good. I like that first big story it told, with Swamp Thing fighting a corporation that's just like, yeah, we'll kill the whole planet and have slaves. We don't care. Him going up against them was great. Just great work. But then after that, when it just goes into the little one-shot stories, it loses so much. And I'm fine with one-shot Swamp Thing stories. The Swamp Thing Winter Special had a one-shot story that was just so good. With carrying the boy through the snow. Incredible comic. I will review it in a collected edition one of these days. Trust me, it's so good. I do have the single issue in my collection as well. But I felt like the one-shot stories, most of them just weren't up to par. But that first story in it, I think, honestly, this collected edition is worth it just for that. I really do. I think it's good. It's I like it. And the art is far better than a lot of the Fifale stuff, which has very inconsistent character designs panel to panel. Wasn't really happy with it. And then some of them they just didn't have the time to flesh it out. So I feel like when I do a lot of rereading of this, I'll mostly just reread the multi-issue story and then the Fifale stuff in the back. Will get reread, but not on every rereading. So that is it for Swamp Thing New Roots Volume 1. Thank you all very much for your support. Remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Check out all the cool links in the description below, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Let me know what you want me to do next time. I got a lot of stuff on the list. But you guys tell me in the comments if you want more Swamp Thing or Flex Mentallo. That's it. Thank you all once again. See you all next time. Bye for now.